Good afternoon. I welcome everyone to the regular briefing of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, the Press Center. We have Russian and foreign correspondents with us. We start with the schedule. The head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov. On November 12-15, the head of the Foreign Ministry of the Republic of Colombia will pay a visit to Moscow. He is scheduled to hold talks with his Russian counterpart. The parties will discuss the current state of prospects for the development of bilateral cooperation in the political, trade, economic, cultural, and humanitarian spheres. There will also be an exchange of views on key topics on the international regional agenda, the issue of interaction at the United Nations, where Russia, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has consistently supported the process of an internal Colombian peace settlement. And, of course, the agenda will also be touched upon at other international venues. On the 18th-19th of November, the next summit of the Group of 20 will be held in Rio de Janeiro in the Brazilian city. On behalf of the President of the Russian Federation, the delegation of our country at this event will be headed by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The leaders' meeting will open with the launch of the Global Alliance to Fight Hunger and Poverty. This is the flagship initiative of the President of Brazil. This temporary coordination mechanism is designed to expand, or, better to say, somehow provide for, or find a way out of problematic moments in international cooperation in the field of food security. Russia intends to actually announce its accession to the alliance. The G20 stated this year that there is enough food in the world. The problem lies in the restriction of effective access to them. This is largely due to the geoeconomic fragmentation created by the West, illegal sanctions against Russian agricultural exports, and everything that Western attempts to block the world, in particular logistics, financial flows and payments, and so on, create. The speeches of the Russian foreign minister are scheduled for November 18th during plenary sessions on the topics of combating inequality, hunger and poverty, as well as the reform of global institutions. On the sidelines of the summit, a series of bilateral talks and contacts of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are also planned. We state the course of the Brazilian presidency towards finding, one might say, a common denominator and a reasonable compromise, a fair balance of interests. Following their predecessors from the countries of the world majority, let me remind you, it was India in the 23rd year, Indonesia in the 22nd. The partners are confidently adapting the agenda of the G20 to the new configuration of a multipolar world. We note an increase in the effectiveness of coordination of emerging economies, the core of which are members and partners in the BRICS dialogue. For the first time, the new Development Bank and the League of Arab States are invited to the summit. Soyuz also successfully got used to the site of the 20. Let me remind you, he was accepted into its ranks last year. For our part, we intend to promote unifying ideas at the summit aimed at implementing the concept of sustainable development, taking into account various national economic models and strategies. We say a position for, or promote approaches for the rational implementation of energy transitions, the maintenance of open, non-discriminatory international trade, the creation of market mechanisms beyond the control of such opportunistic and narrow-minded interests of some countries, in the spirit of the decisions of the Kazan BRICS summit, such as, for example, an independent grain exchange, financial relationship mechanisms, and so on. We will contribute to the further depoliticization of the G20, the condemnation of Western double standards, or simply the destruction of standards by the West as such, the silencing of the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip by the states and their allies, the use of economic tools as a tool of confrontation, the suppression of dissent, on colonial exploitation. We welcome the fact that this year the G20 has returned to issuing ministerial declarations without the geopolitical interpretations imposed by the West. We plan to pay special attention to fixing the agreements of the G20 foreign ministers in the leadership declaration during their meeting on the sidelines of the General Assembly on September 25th of this year, which clearly outlined the vector of the relevant transformations. This means strengthening the voice of the world majority countries in global structures, making appropriate decisions from the Security Council to the IMF, the World Bank, as well as restoring the normal activities of the World Trade Organization, which, as I recall, we have been talking about for many years. This activity within the TOE is blocked by the Americans. We will confirm Russia's readiness to play the role of a guaranteeing supplier of food and energy to the Trushechny countries of the global south and east. We emphasize additional opportunities within the framework of the implementation of the initiative of the President of Russia on the construction of a large Eurasian partnership, the creation of supply chains, logistics routes, and settlement and payment schemes free from Western dictates. And, of course, I would like to stress once again, as before, we are working closely with the chairmanship and delegations on the preparation of this summit, and as a matter of fact, we always do this on a regular basis, and we intend to make a significant contribution to the success of the upcoming G20 summit. We wish our Brazilian friends good luck in this very important final stage of preparation. On November 21st, the third meeting of the Interdepartmental Commission on Caspian Cooperation will be held in the building of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, under the chairmanship of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of our country, Sergei Lavrov. It will be attended by the heads of relevant Russian ministries and departments of 3 Russian coastal regions: Astrakhan region, the Republic of Dagestan, and the Republic of Kalmykia, as well as representatives of the Federal Assembly of our country. During the event, it is planned to discuss a wide range of issues related to the implementation of Russian national interests in the Caspian Sea region, as well as prospects for the development and deepening of Caspian cooperation. And on November 21st-22nd, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will pay a working visit to Brest, the Republic of Belarus, to participate in a joint meeting of the Board of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belarus. As you know, such meetings have been held annually since the 2000th year, and they are an effective mechanism for synchronizing the efforts of the two countries in the international arena. The upcoming event will continue to coordinate approaches to cooperation with the countries of the world majority, what we also call the global southeast, in multilateral formats with an emphasis on the SCO, BRICS, as well as joint efforts to counter the judicial and sanctions aggression of the collective West. As a result, it is planned to adopt a corresponding resolution, approve plans for Meshmid consultations for the next 25th year. It is also planned that the ministers will sign a joint statement on the common vision of the Eurasian Charter of Diversity and Multipolarity in the 21st century, as well as a bilateral declaration on enhancing the role of international law and on guiding principles regarding the qualification of unilateral coercive measures as illegal means of countering, mitigating, and compensating for the negative consequences of such measures. The program of the visit of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov provides for a meeting with his Belarusian counterpart to exchange views on topical issues of bilateral cooperation and the international agenda, as well as foreign policy coordination on multilateral platforms. Of course, special attention will be paid to the topic of diplomatic support of integration processes within the Union State, including the preparation of the meeting of the Supreme State Council of the Union State, scheduled for early December this year. It is timed to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty on the Creation of the Union State in 1991st year. As part of the visit of the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, it is planned to visit the Brest Hero Fortress Memorial Complex and lay flowers at the monument of its defenders, who were the first to take the blow of the Nazi invaders. And this is the memorial complex that has become an example of courage, perseverance, self-sacrifice for several generations of our citizens in the name of protecting the common fatherland. And we turn to the current international agenda. We are starting the situation around Ukraine. First of all, I would like to say that 10 years ago, on November 14th, 2014 President of Ukraine Poroshenko, by his Decree 875, put into effect the decision of the National Security Council of Defense, and on November 4th, 2014 it sounded like this about urgent measures to stabilize the socio-economic situation in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. This was the beginning of the financial, economic, and transport blockade of Donbass, whose population turned out to be really closed literally by this very Kiev regime. And why were such measures taken against Donbass? Yes, for the fact that the population refused to recognize the dictatorship of the national radicals, who came to power, let me remind you, illegally, and as a result of the orchestrated by the states of Britain, France, Germany, and, of course, with the grunting, yapping of the Baltic NATO assistance, and not only them, by the way. Poland is also other allies. So as a result of an unconstitutionally armed coup orchestrated and implemented by their hands, which took place in Kiev in February 2000 of the 14th year. That's all Donetsk and Lugansk did not accept, and the population there stood up to defend their legitimate rights and freedoms, preserving legitimate institutions of power. Having failed to defeat the courageous Donbass, with the help of the regular army and Bandera punishers from the so-called volunteer battalions, as then presented to the world, but the Nazi rulers of Ukraine decided to starve the region, simply deprive its inhabitants of their means of livelihood, make them suffer, starve, as Poroshenko said, addressing the people of Donbass, that, according to him, it was the president of Ukraine who said they would live in basements, their children would live there, and the children of another part of Ukraine would receive everything they needed and live happily. And all this was done with the tacit consent of the West, which has never stopped, and we understand perfectly well, just encouraged both such actions and similar rhetoric. Today, the Kiev regime continues its terror against the civilian population of Russia, subjecting civilian objects to daily artillery shelling and drone attacks. On November 10th of this year, from 0 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning Moscow time, the IFU carried out a massive raid, during which a total of 84 drones were involved, including in the Moscow region, 34 Bryansk, 22 Oral, Kursk, Kaluga regions, on 7 Rostov, 3 Tula and Belgorod to each. The 8th of November this day became a sad date for the residents of Gorlovka. As a result of a kamikaze drone attack, an official car of electric grid workers was blown up, 2 power engineers were killed, and the driver was seriously injured. I want to emphasize that we are talking about civilians. A woman was killed due to the detonation of an unexploded cluster munition. 2 men were injured from drone strikes. In total, from the 8th to the 11th of November, 10 people were injured in the DPI. On the 9th of November, 1 person was killed and 2 wounded as a result of the barbaric shelling by the Ukrainists at the temporary accommodation point of Novaya Kakhovka in the Kherson region. From the 8th to the 12th of November in the Belgorod region, the IFU militants fired 231 ammunition and 110 drones at civilian, I emphasize again, civilian infrastructure and residential buildings. 2 people were killed and 11 were injured. On November 9th, a civilian was killed at the entrance to the village of Stary Kuter as a result of a car explosion on ammunition. His wife received multiple shrapnel wounds. November 10th, Shebekino, drones in court, attacked twice. I would like to emphasize once again that an apartment building is a civilian object. 1 civilian was killed. On November 11th, 1 person was blown up and injured by a mine in the village of Dronovka. On the same day, an oil depot in the Staroskalsky city district was subjected to an enemy attack with the help of drones. The fire caused by the explosion of one of the tanks was eliminated. Thank God, there were no casualties. A resident of the liberated city, probably in the DPI, told the media about the horror she experienced when she witnessed the attacks of a Ukrainian tank on elderly houses, and then she herself became a target in her car. As a result of the shot, she received a concussion, miraculously survived. Hollywood has made a lot of horror films, thrillers, about how they mock people, civilians, how such absolute geeks come, break into houses, shoot people, lock them up, set them on fire, and so on. Maybe in the State Department or somewhere in the White House, they can just turn on the TV and watch those channels that they are trying to turn off, ban, and watch the same thriller only live, and not with actors, but with residents and civilians in the main roles. This series has been going on for many years with American money, with the money of American taxpayers, and not without, but solely thanks to the supply of American weapons and the work that the White House is doing with its so-called allies to increase these supplies. I understand that now it is customary to award Academy Awards, awards for the best theatrical works, to the Kiev regime. Yes, as a matter of fact, this terrible live series does not count on awards. People count on survival, on peace, on the fact that justice, truth will prevail. And so it will be. Russian servicemen, who are clearing the Kursk region from the Ukrainists, have once again recorded the practice of militants using civilians as a human shield near their military equipment, near the village of Plekovo. All those involved, as you understand, in these and other atrocities of the Kiev regime will certainly answer to the fullest extent of the law. Now, about how this punishment befalls them. Russian courts, based on the evidence collected by the investigative committee of our country, continue to sentence Ukrainian Nazis and foreign mercenaries for war crimes, for the shelling in the period from the 2nd of March to the 2nd of April of 2022 year of civil facilities. I emphasize again the infrastructure of Mariupol. The Supreme Court of the DPI sentenced 8 militants of the mortar platoon of the AFU, Sivits Dutch, Bulava Zhirenko, Belyak, Bushkov, Bay, Kirilenko, to imprisonment for terms from 15 to 17 years. The organizer, the leader of the attack on the Russian Center of Science and Culture in Kiev in the 18th year, was sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment in absentia. The leader of the Ukrainian National Radical Organization, Black Committee. It is recognized as a terrorist organization on the territory of the Russian Federation by Bogdan Titskoy. His guilt in committing crimes that were provided for by a number of articles of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation has been fully proven. We are talking about public calls to carry out terrorist activities, organizations, leadership, attacks on the office premises of persons enjoying international protection. It has been established that on February 18th, the 18th year, under the leadership of Titsky, at least 300 extremists threw stones, coloring liquid at the buildings of the Russian Center of Science and Culture in Kiev, smashed glass in windows, put anti-Russian inscriptions on the facade, and caused material damage. An international wanted list has been announced. Investigative measures are continuing to bring to criminal responsibility all persons involved in the attack on Russian diplomatic facilities in Ukraine. A criminal case has been opened against a mercenary from Georgia, Bibishadze, who has been training mercenaries for a long time and is directly involved in the armed conflict as a mercenary on the territory of our country. It was established that he, along with other foreign mercenaries and militants of the armed forces of Ukraine, invaded the Kursk region in August of this year, where, with the aim of intimidating the population, causing significant property damage, and destabilizing the activities of the authorities, committed crimes, criminal acts aimed at killing, and attempted murder of civilians. The investigation is taking measures to establish the whereabouts of Bibishadze and his accomplices. The investigation of the criminal case against 7 militants of the 202nd Battalion of the 103rd Brigade of the Territorial Defense of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Anatoly Voloshin, Vladimir Shulyak, Sergei Karev, Alexander Kuk, Zinovy Sigarik, Andrian Kulbaba, and Oleg Vovka has also been completed. They are accused of committing terrorist acts on the territory of the Kursk region. It is established that these persons in early August repeatedly opened fire to kill Russian servicemen and civilians in the villages of Krasnoktyabrsky, Snagost, Komarovka of the Koronevsky district. As a result of planned investigative actions and operational search measures, all of them were detained and taken into custody. They got acquainted with the materials of the criminal case, which was handed over to the prosecutor for approval of the indictment and referral to court. The investigative authorities of Russia continue to work to bring to justice the Ukranazis for war and other crimes. Well, now about how it's all evaluated in the West. Yes, as a matter of fact, there is no way, because they are in charge of all this. What did they tell us about peace conferences, about how there are peace plans, peace initiatives, and so on? Given that the curators of the Kiev regime are NATO members and individual countries and their leaders, the Anglo-Saxons first of all, and the conductor of this very Anglo-Saxon thought, the Secretariat of the North Atlantic Alliance, it would be nice to quote yesterday's interview or comments by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Once again, the 12th of November of this year, we must, the Secretary General said, confirm our commitment to maintaining the course of the war. You may ask, but how can we combine in the same heads, on the one hand, the holding of so-called supposedly pseudo-peace conferences, and the promotion of certain peace initiatives, with a direct declaration of a course for war? The answer is simple. Of course, it can be combined in one head because some of this is a lie. It is a lie that Westerners and their wards on bank of a pass off as some kind of peaceful initiatives. And it seems to me that it would be useful for every state, and indeed for every journalist, public figure who deals with this topic, to read and think about it. But just for myself, probably, and write out these very statements of Mark Rutte, so that the next time Zelensky or someone on Bankova, as well their curators in the State Department, in the White House, Downing Street, the Foreign Office, in Brussels, Paris, and Berlin, will tell the world community about peace initiatives. We would remember that NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said the following on November 12th. We, that is NATO members, must do more than just keep Ukraine in the fight. For Putin and his authoritarian friends, this is an official statement. This is not a call for de-escalation of the situation, not for peaceful negotiations, or a political and diplomatic way to resolve the situation. This is a call for the continuation of the bloodbath. This call is also supported by a statement in the national capacity of other NATO countries. Look at what is being said in Washington, and those who are still in the White House, those who are just going to come there, all of them say that we need to continue going the same way. Here, for example, is the statement of the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs, of the Barrel Security Policy. He went there, I mean to Kiev on November 9th, with a farewell visit. Without 5 minutes, the retired Euro official advocated massive assistance to the armed forces of Ukraine and the lifting of restrictions on strikes deep into Russia. I have a feeling that when he was appointed a diplomat from the EU, he was confused. He should have been appointed coordinator of arms supplies to NATO. Although, on the other hand, apparently it's the same thing. That's what Barrel said. Once again, he says, As if a Eurodiplomat, I have always called for more and faster help. This is a constant call. It remains relevant. More military assistance, more training efforts, faster deliveries, more money, and also permission to hit the enemy on his territory. Let me remind you again, it was said by the barrel. All this confirms that achieving peace is not included in the plans of the West. They still intend to continue the hybrid war against our country by the hands of the Kiev regime to the last Ukrainian. Well, look, on November 7th, the fourth summit of the European political community took place in Budapest. Zelensky was among the participants. He tried to use this platform once again to promote ideas that were rotten like himself. In the spirit of a dead-end so-called Formula for peace, he spoke about a direct quote of the inadmissibility of a ceasefire. This is being said by a man who, I mean Zelensky, who has already killed his population, which is almost about to reach teenagers. He said that concessions to Russia are unacceptable. In his view, here again is a direct quote, a ceasefire without a guarantee of security will mean the complete occupation of Ukraine. Let me remind you again, Zelensky said in Budapest. At the same time, he once again hysterically begged for Russian assets allegedly frozen in Europe in the amount of $300 billion belonging to Kiev so that the Bandera regime could independently determine for what purposes to spend them. He would rewrite his property and real estate in favor of Ukraine. You look, and you won't need other means. As we can see, further financing, pumping weapons of the banking, and all this junta turns into serious political and monstrous economic problems for its European allies. Budgets have been bursting at the seams in the European Union for a long time. Party coalitions have been disintegrating, not to mention the power ratings falling headlong. The Europeans even hesitated to put a live broadcast of Zelensky's statement. They realize that Kiev's CMS Zora is only interested in money. They understand that their citizens also understand this. Not everyone realizes that Zelensky is his own side, and the people don't care. There is only one question, and when they realize that Zelensky has never been interested in the fate of the people of Ukraine and Ukraine itself, he was only interested in his own political ambitions. He simply believed the West, which began to use him for its own purposes. We drew attention to publications in the British press about the intention of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Macron to try to convince the current US President Biden give permission to the Kiev regime to launch Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russia before Trump's inauguration. According to the media, there are hopes in London that the White House will finally agree to such a step. On the same day, in an interview with a French edition of the French Defense Ministry, Sébastien Lecornu reported on an order signed by him regarding the transfer of about 10 long-range Scalp missiles to the armed forces of Ukraine, with the help of which, so they hope in Paris, the Kiev regime will be able to strike behind the front lines. Well, no, when the Kiev regime strikes behind the front line, I would like to tell Lecornu, the main thing is that he does not hit the French embassy. These publications coincided with the information that appeared in Ukrainian social networks about the intention of the Zelensky regime to issue the received Western missiles for Ukrainian-made products, changing their labeling in order to hit Russia with them. Well, you know, a bloody scam. Everything is in the style of Zelensky, of this whole gang. But we are well aware that this is impossible without the approval of his curators. We would like to remind Washington, London, Paris, and Brussels that they continue to play with fire. The Russian president has clearly outlined our reaction. If the Kiev regime receives permission for the aforementioned strikes, we will regard this as the actual entry of NATO countries into a direct armed conflict with Russia. This will change the essence of the conflict, its nature, with all the ensuing consequences. The response to the use of Western long-range systems on the territory of our country will be inevitable and destructive for them. These facts once again confirm The actual special military operations for the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, the elimination of threats emanating from its territory, as stated by the Russian leadership, all these goals will be fulfilled. Well, to the question of this very filling. Here, we are now talking about the form of implementation of ideology, now about what constitutes, among other things, its essence. In the West, as you know, they are periodically outraged when Russian law enforcement agencies, in accordance with the current legislation, initiate criminal cases on the fact of illegal border crossing by employees of foreign mass media, when journalists of Western publications come to our territory without a visa or relevant documents, as if, and moreover, they are so indignant, as if the legislation of the country where they are going should not apply to Western journalists. Yes, we are forced to watch their reports too, those who enter our country in this way. Read their articles, track their materials on social networks. This is also part of our work. And you know, because they literally justify the aggression of the armed forces of Ukraine in their materials. They do not show the means of neo-Nazis against civilians, Russian prisoners of war, they do not describe. There is no such topic. Just as they do not show, and will not show the desecration of monuments, the desecration of the mass graves of soldiers of the Red Army, who died during the Great Patriotic War, during the liberation of this region. They will not tell about the trick, for example, of Valdez Bortkovicius. Then this is what it is. This is a Lithuanian activist from the organization International Friends of Ukraine Foundation, Russian in Lithuania. He stands for a complete ban on the Russian language, for a complete ban on Russian culture in his country, and in other, by the way, European countries. 2. Last December, he desecrated a monument to Pushkin in Vilnius. Well, Pushkin, of course, has been getting, it seems to me, the most in recent years. In March of this year, Bortkovich publicly justified the terrorist attack in Crocus City Hall. He brought a bucket of feces to the spontaneous memorial to the victims of the terrorist attack, the bloody terrorist attack of the Moscow region. This memorial was organized by the Russian embassy in Vilnius, by everyone who shared the pain of our citizens as their own. It would be correct to call him actually a right-wing extremist. Now he is, I can't even pronounce it, it really is. It hurts, it is, it's not that unpleasant, it really hurts. Now he has desecrated the memorial to the fallen Soviet soldiers in the village of Kazachya Lokhnya, Kursk region. I guess I should tell you how he did it. In order to understand the enormity of this act in general, he relieved a small need. One more time, it's not near, it's not near, it's right on the graves of the people who liberated Europe from Nazism. Here, probably, someone else thinks that the goals of its special military operation denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, can be some kind of abstract story. But how abstract is it? It's about these inhumans. The Western mainstream pretends that there are no neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Not their own, grown there, not abandoned there by Western countries. There is no one with whom our country is obliged to understand that it is a sacred duty to fight, including in the name of the memory of those who died, giving their lives for the whole world during the Second World War. No, there are these neo-Nazis. And now they have come to our land. They do not desecrate the graves of our heroes. But is it only ours? We looked in the Book of Memory of the USA District, who is buried at the desecrated memorial. That's 68 fighters. They are all known. In addition to natives of Russian regions, Moscow region, Khabarovsk, Sverdlovsk, Yaroslavl, Kursk regions, Krasnoyarsk, Stavropol, Krasnodar territories, Gorky, Tambov, Belgorod, Kirov, Irkutsk, Ryazan regions, Tatar, Chuvash Autonomous Republic, Lugansk region. There are wars from Uzbekistan, Asanov Kamenkal, Tajiv Tursun, Kazakhstan Imakhanov Jizik, Kyrgyzstan Borisenko Pyotr Kananovich, Azerbaijan Junior Lieutenant Zainalov Jamil Jabarovich, the same Ukraine, Partisan Kulesh Mikhail Filipovich, Izdai Mishenko Vasily Dmitrievich. Nembai Vasily Markovich. Here is the face of the Kiev regime. This is the face of the West, which sponsors the Kiev regime. What do you think? At least some organization in the world, in NATO countries, and just in Europe, which is understated. Or there are, well, the states of the NATO country, the states, Canada, which defend the memory of the heroes of the Second World War, who act to protect the memory of the victims of the Holocaust. Has anyone said anything at all about this act? And this is one of actually hundreds of thousands of acts to desecrate the memory of the heroes of that time. I did not mention hundreds of thousands, but only at some briefings. We are talking about thousands, but in actual ones over the years. How many monstrous examples have accumulated? How many tombstones were demolished? How many monuments were doused with paint? How many plaques with the names of heroes were torn off? How many monuments were moved on far-fetched pretexts? How many graves were destroyed altogether? No, no one said anything. And how can we separate the memory of the victims of the Second World War? How can we separate the memory of the victims of the Holocaust from the memory of the heroes who made possible the liberation of the survivors, those who were not victims, who were not killed, who were victims but survived? Is it possible to separate the memory of victims from the memory of heroes? No, of course not. But this is happening, unfortunately. I am sure justice will overtake Volos Bortkovich and others like him about the desecrators of monuments to heroes who defeated fascism. We expect an international reaction. We will talk about this on international platforms. We also expect international prosecution of Bertkovich. The results of the vote on the draft resolution against the glorification of Nazism in the UN testifies to the shrinking space for neo-Nazis in the world. The boundaries of their reservation already coincide with the so-called blooming garden of the barrel. Soon there will be only, apparently, brown plants left in it. Speaking of voting on the resolution, I would like to say that we have published a detailed comment on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You can get acquainted with it. Now about the situation in Moldova, by the way, and I will also tell you now about how this country, not the country people, but the regime, which, as we have just seen, made its way to power once again, voted for the aforementioned resolution. We continue to monitor the situation in Moldova. We are forced to state that, as independent experts note, the inconclusive results of the recent presidential elections and convincing facts of falsification, forgery, violations. We are talking about a referendum in the whole electoral process in Moldova, which became for the Moldovan authorities not a symbol to think about changing a destructive course, but an occasion for even more aggressive promotion of the thesis of a non-existent Russian threat. On November 12th, during a visit to the Moldovan Foreign Ministry. This visit was agreed upon in advance at our request. So, Russian Ambassador Oleg Zakharova was handed a note of protest in connection with Russia's alleged interference in the electoral process of the Republic of Moldova, with the aim, as it was said there, of distorting its results. But it also contains an accusation that Russia allegedly launched two unmanned aerial vehicles. They were allegedly found on November 10th of this year in the Kwashensk, Mishkin districts of Moldova. We have already commented on this story on November 11th, and, as you understand, no evidence has been presented by the Sandu regime. Obviously, it will not be, because there is no evidence of them, no facts. Such tactics fully correspond to the way of actions of the Western curators of the Moldovan authorities. It is in the West that they are used to making accusations in the style of Holly, likely with reference to certain closed sources, with reference to the special services. Then it all turns out to be outright lies, misinformation. But this is their style. This is their handwriting. We strongly reject the unfounded accusation of the official Chisinau. The background of such actions and statements is clear and extremely clear. This is done in order to justify the forced transfer of Moldova to the so-called European standards. In fact, these are some kind of Euro rails that lead simply to a cliff. Their real essence lies in the suppression of democracy and freedom of speech, the militarization of the country, the intensification of persecution of political opponents, and increased repression of the opposition. On November 6th, criminal proceedings were resumed against Sandu's main rival in the elections, of the former Prosecutor General of Moldova, standing brazenly. On November 10th, the leadership of the Republic's police admitted to the pro-government media that thousands of people were under special surveillance, including wiretapping, before the presidential elections. You know, I just want to remind you that such pre-election and unfolding electoral processes of history, for example, in the United States in general, led to serious consequences. Remember the Watergate case exactly about wiretapping, all about the same thing, but then it was recognized as a violation of democratic processes, and appropriate conclusions were drawn in the democratic states of the West, and today it is considered the absolute norm for the same Western states that simply do not pay attention to it. Just think, the Sandu regime, so to speak, listened to political opponents by the thousands. Well, so what do they think in Washington, in the European Union, in London, and so on? The so-called pull-up of Moldova to NATO continues. On October 24th, agreements were reached on the provision of military technical assistance by Lithuania to Chisinau, including the supply of military products. Also, the allocation of up to €2 million annually for the period from the 26th to the 28th year. On October 31st, the defense ministers of Moldova and Norway signed an agreement of intent to strengthen partnership in the field of defense. They provide for Chisinau's assistance in the field of training, military education, and the development of a program to strengthen Moldova's defense capability. A similar document was signed with Sweden in August of this year. On November 6th, the Moldovan government approved the start of negotiations on draft cooperation agreements with the defense ministries of Germany and Denmark. On what basis is all this being done ideologically? I'll explain it to them now, here, in order to decide. Maybe someone will say, well, they have the right. And now look, on November 11th, Moldova was on the list of countries that voted against the resolution of the General Assembly on combating the generalization of Nazism. Is it okay? Here you have the very background of all other actions and no other. This is the position of the Kiev regime, and it does not surprise Sandu. As a matter of fact, it is with the approval of the authorities in Chisinau that the work on whitewashing Moldova of the accomplices of the Third Reich is in full swing. On October 24th, a memorial cross was erected with military honors in the village of Seretino in the Levski district, and 12 graves were landscaped at the place of death in June-July of 1941st year. Would you say defenders who tried to save their country, their region, their homes from fascism, Nazism? Oh no, they invaded the Romanian soldiers then on the territory of the Soviet Union, in the phalanxes of Hitler's ally Antonescu. Now commemorative signs are being installed with honors for them. In Moldova, on November 11th, another cemetery of the so-called, as it was said, Romanian heroes who died for the liberation of Bessarabia in July 1941 year, was opened in the village of Ciaciulia of the Galadian district. It's okay, right? Your values, whatever you want. It is obvious that the goal of the disastrous course that is being imposed on Moldova with the West now is to introduce a deep split into Moldovan society, to divide and weaken it for use in their geopolitical interests. This is all unfolding before our eyes. Fortunately, the effect of these actions is the opposite. Both the pressure of the West and the deepening of their own authorities over the people, over historical memory, cause rejection among Moldovans who consolidate to protect the sovereignty of their country and associate its preservation with the development of cooperation with Russia, who are both a proven friend and partner. We have always been and will be for the Moldovan people. I would also like to draw your attention to we were asked to comment on what is happening in the Baltic, attempts to isolate our country. There were many reports on this, in the context of an unprecedented increase in military and political tensions in Europe, sanctions pressure on Russia, and the collapse of traditional mechanisms of multilateral cooperation initiated with the West. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation continues its systematic work in the Baltic, which we consider unpromising and disastrous for all coastal states in this region. The absolutely reckless course of Western countries to curtail essentially any cooperation with Russia in the economic, political, humanitarian, and environmental spheres, as much as some so-called experts would not like, even after Finland and Sweden join the North Atlantic Alliance. The Baltic Sea will not turn into an internal body of water of the North Atlantic Alliance. There will always be a common space for all countries of the region without exception. We will continue to systematically defend our national interests in the Baltic and increase cooperation with responsible partners, including from non-regional countries. Such cooperation is being established, in particular, through the Baltic Platform, an international scientific discussion platform, established on the initiative of the Russian side, within the framework of which topical issues of the region's development are discussed. And my favorite, we haven't talked about it for a long time, is the White Helmets. Oh, this is the very structure that in the West is called a humanitarian organization. In fact, completely. It is not even tame. It is part of the American intelligence community, special services created so that they can carry out their activities, including criminal ones, on the territory of other countries. And now, you won't believe it, it's their birthday. The British Foreign Ministry, aka the Warrior Office, on the 10th anniversary of the creation of the White Helmets on October 25th, published a detailed statement in honor of this organization. The statement is signed not only by London. Other sponsors of this structure were noted. Formally, by the way, until now, they have not been considered or declared this structure as humanitarian. We are talking about Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Qatar, and the USA. Now, as you can see, all of them have congratulated the structure on its birthday. And I remind you in general, what are these very white helmets? After all that they have done and arranged on Syrian soil, turning the suffering of the Syrian people into cheap prawn blood, and cooperation with terrorists into their calling card, London not only does not try to dissociate itself from these militants under cover, but calls them, direct quote, courageous and selfless humanitarian workers. We have been regularly talking about how many crimes are behind these courageous and selfless humanitarian workers for many years. Every chemical provocation in Syria, including the infamous incident in Doma, was carried out with the active preliminary and subsequent interaction of the White Helmets and the British Special Services, which worked both for the domestic audience and for the world information space. Tragic incidents occur where whitecaps appear, and British TV channels receive exclusive material from this so-called Ango, filmed with the sole purpose of shaming the legitimate government of Syria, which, let me remind you, is not only a law, but is also a member of the United Nations. And, by the way, this is what was denied in the West for many years, too, telling about what, as Obama put it there, in my opinion, Assad is still in the brain. Yes, Assad must go, but Obama left, he stayed, and is doing everything to simply reanimate Syria after this very lawlessness arranged by Westerners on the territory of his country. The fact that the heartbreaking shots with children, the white helmets together with the British, really poisoned little Syrians just to get a picture. All this has long been proven. I urge you to familiarize yourself with the detailed report, which is called The White Helmet: Accomplices of Terrorists and Sources of Disinformation. It was prepared by the Foundation for the Study of Democracy Problems on the basis of factual data and interviews with eyewitnesses, as well as with former employees of these very white helmets, because the members of this structure openly admit their sympathies for radical Islamists and terrorists. Now, yes, we hear less about the white helmets, but, unfortunately, with the money of the so-called sponsors, and these are mainly British and American taxpayers, the white helmets are still engaged in subversive activities in Syria, even after the removal of the inconvenient British leader of this organization by his curators. Remember such a lieutenant colonel of the British Army, Miserere James. Even after that, after he died under mysterious circumstances, Britain did not stop supplying the so-called financing. In the 22nd and 23rd years, London has deducted almost £3 million sterling to the White Helmets. This is according to official reports only. No one knows how much there is in bags and bales. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons, well, it passed in the media that Lemaitre left this world, and there were these very financial, monetary affairs. How many volunteers we take, of course, in quotation marks, from white helmets received according to grey schemes through front persons, I think it is impossible to establish now, most likely in the future. Maybe some archives will shed light on this. The white helmets remain an extremely serious element of instability on Syrian soil. The complete cessation of their activities on their territory, I mean Syria, with the subsequent exposure of past crimes, is one of the imperatives of stabilizing the situation in this long-suffering state and in the region as a whole. Now a few important dates. On November 16th, we celebrate the 105th anniversary of the birth of the legendary diplomat, statesman, scientist Anatoly Dobrynin. Let me remind you, he has passed a glorious diplomatic path. For almost a quarter of a century, he served as the USSR ambassador to the United States. We will definitely publish detailed material in the accounts of the Russian Foreign Ministry on social networks. It seems to me that we have come to the centenary in a big way, and we will definitely also highlight this date in the information field. And on November 16th-17th, the Russian Geographical Society, with the participation of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Rosatrudnichestvo, will organize the 10th Annual International Educational Campaign, Geographical Dictation 2024. This is an anniversary event. It will be held both in Russia and abroad in full-time and remote formats. It is aimed at popularizing geographical knowledge, as well as increasing interest in science, and, of course, in national heritage. More than 10,000 sites around the world have already joined this large-scale educational campaign. This year, in addition to traditional places, namely schools, universities, libraries, religious organizations of various faiths participate in it. Such diversity indicates that the interest in geography, The history of the native country. Unite people regardless of their religion and occupation. The 10,000th platform was the SuperSur project, which offers participants to write a dictation right on the ice floe of the White Sea, combining an intellectual geographical journey with unforgettable live reel impressions. Let me remind you, everyone is invited to participate. I'm not going to forget about the dictation itself right now. First of all, of course, this is the scientific community, graduates of Russian universities, representatives of associations of compatriots, and friendship societies with Russia. All information about the event and the procedure for registering the site is posted on the official dictation website. The link, of course, will be in the text of the briefing. And on November 20th, the second International Forum Dialogue on Fakes 2.0 will be held in Moscow. The organizer is the autonomous nonprofit organization Dialogue. The regions will be attended by representatives of federal executive authorities, the business community, international experts in the field of combating fraud on the Internet. We believe that this is a very interesting event to be held once again, and I will say that we will also take an active part in it. We have something to say, we have something to show. Well, at the moment, the anti-fake section of the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been operating for many years, where examples of publications containing false information in our country, and, accordingly, a refutation are given. Traditionally, we had a refutation column on our website, materials in the media, but the problem of fakes did not receive such a level and scale. She became full-length, well, about probably 10 or 15 years ago, although there was all this disinformation, information wars. But as a special genre, it seems to me that this is, alas, the phenomenon of the last decades. Therefore, we keep this column. It is filled literally every week. If earlier we published separate materials, separate articles, separate pieces of information, today we publish reviews. Together with our foreign institutions, we collect relevant publications and reviews and make such digests of fakes. But I would like to say that we take this opportunity to invite all representatives of the media. And, by the way, if representatives of specialized publications hear and see us today, you are welcome. The organizers are waiting for everyone. It will also be interesting for us to talk with professionals who specialize in this topic. A link to the forum's website, information about accreditation for this event, it will be in the text of today's briefing. The 20th Forum of Interregional Cooperation between Russia and Kazakhstan will be held in Ufa, Republic of Bashkortostan, on November 26-27th. The organizers of the event are the Ministry of Economic Development of our country, the Government of the Republic of Bashkortostan, as well as the Ministry of Trade and Integration of the Republic of Kazakhstan. The Forum of Interregional Cooperation of our countries is held annually in order to support the development of economic, cultural, and humanitarian ties between the two countries. Traditionally, it is attended by representatives of business, scientific, public circles, heads of ministries, heads of subjects of the Russian Federation, regions of the Republic of Kazakhstan, following the results of the Forum of the 23rd year, which was held in the city of Kostanay of the Republic of Kazakhstan. 5 interregional cooperation documents were signed, as well as commercial agreements for the production of lifting equipment and food products totaling about 7.7 billion rubles. A rich business and cultural program is waiting for the state guests of the 20th Forum in Ufa. I envy that there. Within 2 days, discussions will be held on the topic of realizing the potential of trade and economic cooperation between the regions of Russia and Kazakhstan, expanding interregional ties, and opportunities for industrial cooperation between the two countries. Ufa knows how to receive guests. I am sure that this time there will also be a warm welcome. An exposition of large-sized machine-building equipment of the regions of Russia and Kazakhstan will also be organized. At the exhibition of achievements of the national economy of the two countries, the regions of the enterprise will be able to present their stands. We will also post a link for registration on the official website of the forum. In the text of today's briefing, participants will be able to get acquainted with potential business partners, the investment potential of Bashkortostan, the conditions for opening a business in this republic, the Forum Youth Entrepreneurship in Russia and Kazakhstan, exchange of experience and partnership prospects. Will bring together about 300 participants for joint initiatives and exchange of experience. One of the main cultural events will be a fashion show. The best designers of Russia and Kazakhstan will show their works. They will present clothing lines in national, modern design. In general, the successes and achievements of the light industry will also be demonstrated. But there is one more thing to be done. I will say the word test in this case. We are talking about a gastronomic festival. I know how they go. Guests of the forum will be able to taste these traditional authors' dishes of the peoples of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Bashkortostan. Hold on, because it's really all very difficult, but at the same time very tasty. And for music lovers, the Voice of Friendship of the People Festival will be held, in which artists from the regions of Russia and Kazakhstan will take part, as well as links for accreditation for the work of the media and details about the forum. We will also give in the text of today's briefing. And one more useful information, I think, for everyone, within the framework of the Comprehensive State Program of the Russian Federation for International Development Assistance. The Russia with You project is functioning. He tells Russians, citizens of foreign countries, about the activities of our country in the field of international development assistance. Rosatrudnichestvo promotes the attributes of this brand among partner organizations, which are used when labeling humanitarian cargo. To promote it abroad, increase the recognition of Russian aid, a portal on international development assistance has been launched with a map of humanitarian projects and open access to the brand book Russia with You. Commercial companies, public organizations, authorities, and even individuals can also use corporate identity within the framework of the Russia with You project in the period from the 23rd to the 24th years. The Volgograd Organization, the regional public structure, as it is called, the Volgograd Regional Public Organization House of Friendship, with the support of the Ministry of Emergency Situations, the Ministry of Defense of Russia, the Federal Agency for Nationalities, Russian Railways, has delivered humanitarian aid to crisis zones. Since October of the 23rd, more than 100 tons of humanitarian cargo have been delivered. Following the example of Volgograd, more than 55 regions of Russia have already been involved in international humanitarian projects. The aid delivered through the Ministry of Emergency Situations of Russia is also marked with the Russia with You logo, as part of the coordination of the agency's efforts to promote information about Russian aid abroad. In addition, branded products Russia with You are distributed among partner organizations. For example, it was handed over to the participants of a large African scientific expedition, which was initiated by Russian fishing. Two Ross research vessels are involved in the expedition, Atlanera and Atlantis Fisheries, with groups of scientists of the All-Russian Scientific Research Institute of Fisheries and Oceanography. So we will also give all the links in the text of the briefing. It seems to me that very interesting, useful information can be for you. Well, I have an announcement about our information work. We continue to expand our digital diplomatic family. On the eve of the first ministerial conference of the Russia-Africa Strategic Partnership, the Telegram channel of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia in French was launched. Now our friends are primarily in Africa, like-minded people including around the world. Anyone who is sincerely interested in Russia's position on key issues on the world agenda can receive reliable, objective information about Russian foreign policy, read, watch the speeches of the leadership of our country and the ministry, without distortions, without retellings, which also sometimes suffer from inaccuracy literally directly, in order to avoid the bias of the mainstream French media, in order to avoid Western censorship and sophisticated barriers. On the feed of the channel, the Telegram channel in French. I repeat it again. The Telegram channel of the Foreign Ministry is French-speaking, French-speaking. We will definitely talk, including along with the issues of the foreign policy agenda, international relations. We will talk about culture, achievements, and the beauty of our wonderful country in general. So subscribe, it will be interesting. As they say, Ben blame, and by tradition, the link will also be placed in the text of today's briefing. You know, I would like to stand on one topic separately, completing the introductory part, and at the same time address the journalists, and those who are with us today, and those who will read and learn about this information from the news. And, of course, to the communities of journalists, journalistic communities, unions, and so on. The UNESCO Secretariat and personally Director General Azul, the Director General of this organization, continue to defiantly ignore the crimes of the Kiev regime against Russian journalists, including targeted killings, terrorist attacks, and attempts on life. We are outraged by the next draft of the report. I emphasize that this is a draft report. It is presented by the Director General of UNESCO and will be submitted for consideration by the Intergovernmental Council of the International Programme for the Development of Communication on November 21-22 in Paris, prepared on the basis of certain data, as they say, politically biased. Obviously, this is data. Apparently, we already know where all these politically biased Western or pro-Western angos come from. This is the essence of this report. At the same time, the murder of Russian media representatives is completely ignored there, and this report does not in the least reflect the real state of affairs related to the safety of journalists and the problem of impunity for crimes committed against employees, media workers. The methodology used by the UNESCO Secretariat also causes a lot of serious complaints. It is based on biased so-called criteria, allegedly allowing to determine which of the deceased professionals of the media sphere is worthy of the reaction of the UNESCO Director General and accounting in this most mournful list, and who is not. How is it in general? In other words, if a journalist was blown up, so to speak, west of Paris, he deserves to be told about it somewhere on the social network by Miss Zuligin, director of UNESCO. And if it's east of Paris, then maybe it's not necessary to talk about it. So what is it? Any criteria? The statistics given in the report look like blatant hypocrisy, according to which, as if not a single Russian journalist died in advance from the 22nd to the 23rd years. It's not that you have no conscience, Mrs. Zulia. In this case, we are already talking, sorry, about intelligence. How can you present this to the world community? We will have to remind Ms. Zula once again that only during the period under review, only for the one indicated, Daria Dugina, Vladlen Tatarsky, Oleg Klokov, Rostislav Zhuravlev, Boris Maksudov died at the hands of the Kiev regime as a result of contract killings and targeted fire of the AFU. Moreover, the Russian journalist Rostislav Zhuravlev, in respect of whose murder Miss Azulia still squeezed out an expression of regret. Regret, but not condemnation. They placed Ukrainian media workers on the list of the dead. The UNESCO Secretariat defiantly ignored the reliable information officially transmitted by the Russian side about the massacres of domestic journalists. Distortion, whose inadvertence is refuted by their obvious geographical and political bias, affected not only the data for our country. I want to be a lawyer not only for Russian journalists, I would also like to mention those whom Ms. Azul has ignored, although they are citizens of other countries and represent the media of other states. The number of representatives of the Arab media who died as a result of indiscriminate Israeli military strikes on Palestine in the 23rd year is significantly underestimated, 24 people. At the same time, according to available data, 97 violent deaths of media employees were recorded only in the end of the 23rd year, riddled with unreliable, as it were, factology, and if it is unreliable, it is already, forgive me, fakes. The draft report itself becomes a source, a tool for spreading disinformation. At the same time, the full responsibility for such a situation is borne by the CEO, Ms. Zulina, whose name has been sent over the years countless appeals and notifications about the crimes of the Kiev regime against journalists. But, as we can see now, she deliberately, not by accident, nor by mistake, deliberately did not include them in the report. Such actions, and in fact inaction, directly negatively affect the situation in the organization, I mean UNESCO, provoking its politicization, polarization of opinions, and, in principle, departure from the mandate. We are talking not only about gross violations of the principles of impartiality, equidistance, as defined in paragraph 5 of Article 6 of the Charter of the organization, and the implementation of direct instructions for member states, but they were formalized by the resolution of the 29th session of the UNESCO General Conference, entitled Condemnation of Violence Against Journalists, and the decision of the 216th session of the UNESCO General Council. In fact, the leadership of the organization contributes to undermining the very foundations of its functioning, what has been built up with decades of painstaking interstate interaction and cooperation. Ms. Zul is ready to sacrifice to the opportunistic interests of the bloody Kiev regime, so protected by its Western patrons. I remember very well the times when such reports included either press releases or statements. For example, journalists who were victims of some kind of domestic injuries, domestic crimes, and there was no way to say that, well, there was a fight. It had nothing to do with a person's professional activity. But we were told that even if, so to speak, a journalist left the cafe and quarreled with someone on domestic grounds, since he is a journalist, he still has the right to protection. Dozens of people have died in the last year alone with a camera, microphone, and dictaphone in their hands. They were not just employees at that moment and were on duty, but they fulfilled their duty, realizing that they were risking their lives, and still went to the front line for the truth. And it turns out that everything that Ms. Zul, UNESCO, and the secretariat of this organization have for reaction is thrown into the bucket. And it turns out that this was done on a national basis. There is an obvious connection here. And this in general does not just negate the mandate, it raises the question of a person's moral compliance with his position. We categorically reject such an extremely biased, but on the verge of a Russian approach, the CEO to his direct official duties. We do not intend to put up with it. As a first step, we will strictly define our point of view with regard to this area of the Secretariat's work during the upcoming meeting of this event, and we will also raise this issue in other relevant UNESCO events. And I'm ready to answer your questions. Is international life with us?
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
Last week, the head of the Polish National Security Bureau, I from the North, said on the air of the Pozad TV channel that any initiatives to end the conflict in Ukraine should proceed from the prevailing realities. And I will allow myself to quote, any negotiations that could lead to peace should reflect the current reality, Zakharova said. He reacted in this way to the messages the proposal of the team of the US President-elect Trump on the settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. How would you comment on this statement?
Well, it seems to me that the head of the Polish National Security Bureau, who was quoted at the time, or in turn quoted us, this is exactly what the Russian Federation has been talking about, and has said it repeatedly for a long time. The settlement of the Ukrainian crisis is impossible without eliminating its root causes, taking into account Russia's interests, primarily in the field of security and, of course, the situation on Earth. Well, the President of Russia, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of our country, speaks about this regularly. We are talking about the recognition of territorial realities that are based on the right of peoples to self-determination. It is impossible to talk about achieving sustainable and long-term peace without fixing the neutral, non-aligned status of Ukraine. The eradication of Nazism in this country, by the way, from which Poland suffers at one time, and even now, it is necessary to get rid of chauvinism from the abolition of all discriminatory laws that run counter to all the norms that have been worked out, including and primarily even in the European space. This is exactly what the President of our country spoke about in his speech here within the walls of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on June 14th of this year, clearly defining the conditions for reaching a final solution to the conflict. Maybe this is the very process that can be conditionally called begins to reach. Maybe, I do not know, something else. Maybe this representative of official Warsaw somehow understood it before. It's hard to say, but it seems to me that everything has probably coincided here, both the realities on Earth and the realities in the budgets of the European Union countries and the realities on their land, taking into account those processes which take place in their countries. And I think that the Russian arguments, I think they always clearly fix them. Another thing is that they pretended that they did not understand what we were talking about. So I think that, probably, in the aggregate, awareness really comes somehow.
Thank you very much. And the second question. You have already touched on this event today. I am referring to the summit of the European political community held in Budapest on November 7th, and the informal meeting of the European Council. How would you comment on the outcome of this event?
Well, as you correctly said, I have already settled on it. If we sum up some line, I'll say that, well, probably this event once again demonstrated the anti-Russian, confrontational nature of the format itself. Again, we hear slogans about peace, talk about security in Europe. At the same time, all this is against the background of the same appeals that we also hear from the same countries that took part in this forum. Well, for example, as I said today, to prevent a ceasefire in the Donbas, to continue supplying weapons to the Kiev regime, what else is there? Solve the issue by force on the battlefield. That's how it all fits together. But I have already said that this is exactly why it all fits together and is very organic, because the first part, everything related to the rant about the world that we hear from the mouths of Western officials, is all a lie, and it will become true when they abandon aggressive rhetoric and illegal aggressive steps. Well, in particular, the supply of weapons to the Kiev regime. Among other things, of course, we recorded his spirit of colonial thinking, neocolonialism. It was also evident in the performances. And they are trying to impose it, to impose these same approaches on sovereign states, to impose an anti-Russian policy on independent countries, believing that for some reason they still have the right to do so. They are not trying to use the European political community, probably to simulate the rapprochement of Eurocandidates with the European Union and their maximum integration into the aggressive policy of Brussels. In fact, as I have already said, we see the opposite. We see multilateral formats that have been crushed and sometimes destroyed somewhere, and they are crushed by new initiatives, without taking into account Russia. What can be done without taking into account Russia's opinion on security issues in Europe? For example, I cannot imagine. Well, it's just that someone probably doesn't have a card. He can talk about these topics from this position. Among other things, it seems that these states have not yet abandoned the concept of equal, indivisible security, or they have already moved to a direct colonial mentality, its implementation. If I am still operating with concepts such as indivisible security, then perhaps we need to stop undermining this very stability and security, and stop building dividing lines, stop, so to speak, conducting hybrid wars. And while they are doing it all, we draw our conclusions accordingly. As for the informal meeting of the European Council, it seems to me that its main result is the absence of any real results. They repeat there like a mantra, a learned text about the desire to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Apparently, everything else is solved by inertia, by the residual principle, and the political will is only enough to state the systemic deterioration of the economic situation in the EU, and the gradual loss of competitiveness, the outflow of business, and so on. Probably, they do this because these problems are so obvious that it is almost impossible to hush them up or somehow sweep them under the carpet. Here, the report discussed in Budapest by the former Italian example Draghi, in general, quite frankly revealed the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the EU economic system, including the adverse consequences of a politically motivated rupture or termination of mutually beneficial cooperation with our country. But we have already given detailed comments on this. You can see, we will also post a link in the text of the briefing. The difficulties of the obvious European Union, with the search for opportunities to break the current impasse, probably because they can't admit the truth, probably because they can't admit to themselves that the course is wrong. The starting point for correcting the economic situation of entry must inevitably be the recognition that the anti-Russian policy imposed on Brussels by Washington fundamentally does not correspond to the interests of the European Union itself. It is anti-EU in nature by virtue of geopolitical moments, by virtue of history, by virtue of the distribution of resources, and so on, and so on. And it seems to me that it is high time for the EU people to understand that the scale of the economic problems they are experiencing is literally directly proportional to the degree of their servility in relations with the United States. Well, they also cannot and do not want to recognize this, because then it will be necessary to state the loss of some part of sovereignty. This is a painful understanding. They drive away from themselves. It is also understandable. Well, you know, one situation around the northern streams proves it. Even the fact that it was done by someone, to put it mildly, by someone of their own inside NATO, they cannot even admit that. It's not like catching the hand, it's not like pointing the finger at those who declared in Washington their intention to destroy the Nord Stream. It was President Biden and Deputy Secretary of State Newland. They can't even voice that it was done by someone inside the NATO or near the NATO community. They can't even do that. They do not close investigations. They do not let journalists to the truth, to the facts. They do not hold any conferences or briefings on the progress of the investigation. Here's a concrete example for you. Eats continue to please overseas partners. Right now, during a meeting of the European Council, Ursula von der Leyen solemnly promised the now new Belladome administration to further increase imports of American liquefied gas, which costs Europeans much more expensive than Russian gas and reduces the competitiveness of the EU economy. Imagine a person has committed himself against the interests of his own countries to buy more expensive than cheaper. This is a theater of the absurd, but we are seeing it now on all fronts. It is not surprising that considerable attention at the U meeting was paid to Trump's victory in the US presidential election, to the impact of this victory on transatlantic relations. I think that even the way the U members reflect on this issue speaks of their absolute dependence on Washington. They cannot accept this as, I don't know, a sovereign decision of another country that is not a member of the European Union. No, for them it is a change. Apparently, you know how it is a change of chair, or a change of the sovereign on the chair managing their lives. And this is so fateful, and it so to speak, emphasizes their dependence and not independence, that they cannot even behave decently in any way. Well, it seems to me that we have even devoted more time to this than necessary, and so, in my opinion, everything is clear.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so is Ria Novosti with us? Yes, Maria Vladimirovna. Hello. Yes, good afternoon. There are two questions for you today. The first question. This week, the media reported that the border of Finland with Russia may be opened in 2025 year. And can you confirm or deny this information? And is Russia ready to take such a step, taking into account Finland's openly Russophobic policy, to participate in NATO exercises and provide financial assistance to Ukraine? You know, well, what's the point of reasoning can or can't? Well, this is some kind of, such a subjunctive mood, which, in my opinion, should not be peculiar to the publication you are talking about. Because the responsibility in this matter lies entirely with the Finnish authorities, and if this publication is from Finland, it could, in principle, just pick up the phone or write some kind of request and get an answer, whether it will be opened from the Finnish side or not. I'll just remind you, because it was Helsinki, under a far-fetched pretext, that they said that the reason was allegedly instrumentalized migration from Russia. So it was in Helsinki that, in violation of their obligations in the field of ensuring human rights, this decision was finally made to completely close the checkpoint of the Russian-Finnish border. And this is a position that Helsinki again adheres to until today. Therefore, it seems to me that it is necessary to move away from this kind of empty speculation and just get a concrete answer to the question of Finnish officials. The question that should be addressed to the official Helsinki is whether they intend to do this or not. And we have repeatedly stated that this decision is frankly politicized, which was taken in Helsinki without any consultations with the Russian side, which is always open to dialogue with Finnish representatives on all issues of ensuring the functioning of the joint border. Here, in my opinion, there is another interesting position of volley, or a fragment in your question, which may be the key to the answer, in order to open the border and make the life of citizens of our countries more comfortable. The Finnish authorities should simply get out of the state of Russophobic frenzy they have been in lately for a while, and give a sober assessment of whether closing the border meets the interests of Finnish citizens. Let them not think about us for a second. Let them think about their own citizens. Does this approach contribute to the development of the economy? Again, not ours, Finland. And, by the way, this Finnish publication could address these questions to the official in Helsinki. Whether all this contributes to humanitarian and human contacts, I think this question should not be asked. We already know the answer to it, no? Although the rest of the questions are also obvious answers, but it would be nice to get an answer from the official Helsinki, so as not to write such materials in the subjunctive mood. Thank you. And the last question. 4 years ago, more precisely, 4 years have passed since the signing by the leaders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, and the declaration of a complete ceasefire and all military operations in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone, 2020th year. How do you assess the significance of this document? It seems to me that it is difficult to overestimate the significance of this trilateral statement. Russia, including the president of our country personally, made significant efforts to reach agreements that stopped the bloody war. Just 2 months later, a summit with the participation of the heads of Azerbaijan and Armenia was held in Moscow in January of the 21st year at the suggestion of the President of Russia, where the peace process was launched. A trilateral working group was also established under the co-chairmanship of the deputy prime ministers of the three countries to unblock all economic and transport links in the South Caucasus. And in the future, on the basis of the statement of the 9th of November of the 20th year, the entire complex of trilateral agreements was formed. The main directions of the Armenian-Azerbaijani normalization were identified. This includes the elaboration of a peace treaty and the removal of mutual transport concerns, meaning the blockade and the delimitation and demarcation of the border, and the development of contacts through civil society. And when there was active work on such a trilateral basis, we managed to achieve real serious results on a wide range of issues. For example, in June of the 23rd year, within the framework of the Trilateral Working Group, we were close to the practical restoration of transport routes in the region. However, under pressure from the West, Yerevan, as it was said, froze its participation in the group, and then, in all trilateral formats. Let's be frank and just admit that the United States and the European Union, who tried to try on the role of mediator, could not come up with anything themselves. They only copied our achievements, but at the same time distorted their essence in the hope of subjugating the peace process for themselves. At the same time, the true goal is obvious. They probably want to take control of the region, get into it, squeeze Russia out of it, and at the same time squeeze out Iran and Turkey. By the way, another hotbed of tension. They absolutely do not care. They absolutely do not care even about the fate of the South Caucasus, about people, about their destinies. They have their own ambitions, and we, unlike Westerners, are interested in a safe, stable, prosperous South Caucasus. We are present there. Our interests are natural, historical, economic, humanitarian, and finance are different. We are ready to develop this region both because it is in our interests and because it guarantees stability and security here on this part of our planet. The Russian country is ready to continue providing comprehensive assistance to Azerbaijani and Armenian partners in order to achieve sustainable peace and prosperity in the region on the basis of trilateral agreements at the highest level. Thank you. So, is the Media Corporation of China with us? Yes. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We also have 2 questions today. The 31st informal meeting of APEC leaders will take place soon. The theme of the conference is empowerment, inclusivity, growth. The conference itself will be devoted to such issues as trade, investment, energy, digital transformation, and much more. In this context, in your opinion, what are the main challenges facing the Asia-Pacific region now, on the way to promoting economic recovery and long-term development, but also in the face of these challenges? What joint measures will be relevant from Russia and China? You know, not so long ago, we all overshadowed and listed, for example, a pandemic, for example, international terrorism, for example, man-made disasters, for example, in an emergency situation, for example, overcoming poverty or poverty as a direct challenge. For example, the inequality of the state. Today the situation is different. and in place of natural ones, not by nature, but simply in the course of historical development, taking into account wars, taking into account colonization, taking into account the historically discriminatory attitude, so to speak, of this blooming garden in relation to the rest of the world. So these challenges and threats have been replaced by absolutely man-made ones, which are associated with trade wars, sanctions policy, as in the form of the implementation of a trade war, the destruction of the rudiments, or the destruction of the security architecture that was planned, or in some part built. Here is all this lawlessness that the West is creating, not being shy at all, and simply not considering it necessary to bind itself in any way with international law. And we attach great importance to promoting a balanced, mutually beneficial, equal, inclusive dialogue in the Asia-Pacific region. A significant obstacle, as I have already said, is certainly the absolutely irresponsible policy of the Western powers. At this stage, their attempts at such a neo-colonial revenge by any means desire to preserve their former dominance. We are talking about such things. Well, I have listed some of them, but also protectionism, which is absolutely contrary to their own obligations and attitudes. Third-party sanctions, trade barriers, unfair competition, which led to the disruption of global supply chains, to soaring inflation, prices, and the collapse of people's, companies' and corporations' perceptions of prospects and long-term development in general. Along with this, of course, we also see persistent attempts by the collective West to realize its geopolitical ambitions by artificially fragmenting the regional space. Again, the same principle, dividing and dominating. They impose the NATO ideology, crush it or replace it. Both are relevant in this case. The economic benefit of politicized approaches. The only effective way to overcome these challenges, we see the unification of the efforts of the world's majority countries in order to increase their contribution to ensuring sustainable growth in the world economy. And we assign the central role of building practical regional cooperation to the APEC format and consider it as a popular tool for fine-tuning common approaches to issues, in particular, trade liberalization, support for small and medium-sized businesses, increasing labor productivity, digitalization, transport, food and energy security, and, I would like to note separately, the effectiveness of exactly what you are talking about. The Russian-Chinese link at the APEC site. We managed to set a positive tone, strengthen the forum to overcome the challenges of the global economy, and prevent the erosion of its socio-economic mandate. We see good prospects for building up our constructive cooperation in the interests of forming an open, dynamic, but also viable peaceful Asia-Pacific community in accordance with the APEC development guidelines until the 40th year. Today, the prospects for the development of the Asia-Pacific region largely depend on whether this region will follow the path of cooperation, the interconnectedness of its own national interests, which are harmonized by international law, or it will curtail its trajectory of this correct, respectful, equal cooperation interaction, aimed at realizing national interests, not to the detriment of everyone else. And it will turn towards these Western, as they say, narrative attitudes, and turn into an Indo-Pacific project focused on creating and maintaining an American-centric system of bloc mechanisms and partnerships. In fact, neocolonialism. The founders, as you know, are betting on the fragmentation of the regional political and economic space, the rupture of the established trade and investment, production and household chains, the reformatting of economic ties that have been developed for decades. How do they achieve this? How do they achieve this? Of course, by different methods. I also listed them today, but one of them is unfair competition, a departure from the law, legality in general, some kind of agreement, all kinds of implementation of trade wars. Therefore, yes, and it must be said that such actions of the West, they also throw the state of the region away from the goal. And the goal is stated, stable positive growth. I mean economically. The growth dynamics are stable and positive. They also lead astray from the true path and do not allow the installations that were agreed within the region as common goals and objectives to be realized. And why? Again, we return unfair competition. Western countries are sagging economically, technologically lagging behind, or have lagged behind, so that it is very difficult to catch up. Without the collapse of this very growth rate, in particular in Asia, and now they are using the whole range of measures in order to try to restrain development in this part of the world and increase the opportunities that have been lost through their own fault and somehow, well, somehow level off in development. And most importantly, wherever NATO appears in any form, expect trouble. Thank you. And the second question. These days, the 15th Chinese Air Show is already taking place in the Chinese province of Guangdong. More than 1,000 companies from 47 countries, from different regions of the world, took part in it. Russian Su-57 fighters will also make their debut at this air show. This is the first demonstration flight of this stealth fighter abroad. Could you comment on the participation of 157 in this exhibition? But what, in your opinion, are the advantages of this Chinese air show? Well, it seems to me that you should comment on experts. I have seen their ratings. They believe that Flight 157 demonstrated its unsurpassed qualities. The second part of the question. We welcome any international cooperation that is conducted on an equal basis, which allows us to share achievements. Here again, on an equal basis. And of course, traditionally held since the 96th year in Zhuhai, the International Aviation Exhibition has desperately achieved excellent success in this field, successfully functions, gives everyone the opportunity to demonstrate their achievements, which we have taken advantage of as a country. It is important that not only the achievements of the Chinese aerospace industry are demonstrated there, but also the latest processing, the leading developments of world manufacturers. Our companies, Russian companies in this line, or in this environment, occupy leading positions. And as you probably know, our country traditionally participates in the Zhuhai Air Show, contributes to strengthening industry cooperation, promoting domestic products to world markets, in the market of China and other countries. Well, it seems to me that the international debut of the Su-57 in China has become bright and eloquently speaks of our most serious attitude in this direction. Thank you very much. So, is Reiter with us?
Maria Vladimirovna, good evening. Yes, good afternoon. Reuters is with you, and we have a question that concerns the information that our sources tell us. And they say about it something like the following: that Russian, American, and Iranian diplomats are working on a security proposal that will allow for a ceasefire in Lebanon. In particular, it allegedly says that Russia guarantees Israel that it will stop supplying Hezbollah with weapons from Iran, as well as that Syria will not use its territory or armed forces to ensure such supplies. Here, in fact, is the question: are such negotiations going on? Is Russia really involved in them? And if so, can you tell us the details?
You know, I can only say that we are paying special attention to the aggravation or the escalated confrontation in the Arab-Israeli conflict zone, or this confrontation, as you know, is in the sphere of Russian efforts on international platforms. I mean, first of all, the UN Security Council. We are making vigorous efforts to stabilize the situation. We are talking about our international legal approaches and the situation with assistance in the release of hostages. We use all of our own of this mechanism, and in general, all this is being done to end the bloodshed as soon as possible. I do not know what sources you are talking about. You do not name them. It's difficult for me to comment, so that's all I can say about it. I voiced them to you. If I have something extra, then I will definitely come back to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Elnad with us?
Yes, good afternoon.
Yes, hello. Hello.
Western media have recently begun to write that the agreement on strategic partnership between Russia and Iran will not be signed. We do not believe the Western media. And would you like to know firm, reliable sources whether it will be signed and when it can be expected?
You know, it seems to me that such materials for the Western media are literally self-revealing. That's the truth. And perhaps we should make copies of these notes. If you read newspapers, cut them out. If you read online publications, take screenshots. If you watch similar stories, then save videos. The fact is that the spread of such speculations by individual authors in the West is aimed at sowing doubts in the public field and creating the illusion of discord, well, including in bilateral relations. It seems to me that effective cooperation between Moscow and Tehran is developing for the benefit of the peoples of our countries. It is going on its own. It is developing very intensively, and we will continue this work. I am sure that you do not doubt. And I urge those who spread rumors to the contrary not to doubt. As for the new interstate agreement on comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and Iran, as you know, it is ready. It will be signed, as the president of the Russian Federation said in Kazan at a meeting with the president of Iran, who took part in the BRICS summit. The document will be signed during the bilateral visit in a solemn atmosphere, and the dates are being agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Verelk is with us.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, hello.
I have two questions today. The first question from the president of Azerbaijan, speaking on the 8th of November, stated that all the Minsk Group co-chairs had been behind Armenia for 30 years, and that although the great powers that were part of the Minsk Group, and Russia was among them, declared that there was no military solution to the conflict, but he purposefully prepared for, this is what I was able to do. He also stated that the 44-day war of the 20th year and the attack on the fathers, which resulted in the expulsion of the Armenian population from there, is not only a defeat of Armenia, but also a direct speech, but also a bitter, humiliating defeat of those who stand behind it. Let me remind you that according to Hamali, he is among these countries, well, as with the chairman of a certain group. Russia also goes. How would you comment on these statements, such an attitude towards Russia, to the many years of mediation efforts? After all, in fact, he directly admits that he never intended to sign a compromise version of the peace treaty. And even after the 40-day peace war, the trilateral statement was preparing for an attack on his father, which he carried out in September, because...
Well, it seems to me that you have repeatedly seen how both countries, official Baku at all levels and official Yerevan at all levels, highly appreciated the mediation role of Russia, and at various stages of the settlement of the situation. As for the Minsk Group, as you know, in general, we ourselves were dissatisfied with its work. We just criticized it to a much greater extent, especially after Westerners began blocking work there, and expressed this position openly. The positive that was in the Minsk Group It was largely based on Russian developments. In particular, they were reflected in the trilateral agreements of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, which were also highly appreciated by the two capitals. And when the tricks of the Westerners began, and let me remind you, in February of the 22nd year, this group was buried by the hands of representatives of Western countries. It also became obvious, so to speak, that they were set up. I don't know in what position they were standing there, and for whom and why, but they were obviously not set up for settlement, but completely different things, for politicization, for their own interests. But this has nothing to do with us. Therefore, once again, in the Minsk group, we got harsher on business. And we have made our contribution to the work of this group and to the settlement of the situation as a whole. And this contribution has been repeatedly evaluated at the highest level in the two countries.
Well, here he still meant the Minsk group until the 22nd year they just.
Well, I want to say again that we have. Well, you can cling to my words and say that you first scolded the Minsk group, and before that you talked about its efforts. Where there was a positive, we talked about the positive. Where negativity began to prevail, they began to say that the group no longer works, that its activities are blocked, artfully blocked, and then simply blocked by Westerners. Well, there are different historical moments, there are different situations and contexts. It seems to me that it is obvious that the mediation role of Russia, and this is recorded in public statements and Baku of Yerevan, at various historical stages, was highly appreciated by them.
And the second question, Maria Vladimirovna. On November 6th, a court in Baku found political scientist Nazikit Mammadov guilty of treason and cooperation with Russian special services and sentenced her to 13 years in prison. According to the prosecution, she allegedly conducted secret activities under the guise of a political scientist and a journalist, and published pro-Russian materials, and also often traveled to Moscow, participated in secret meetings, received money for this activity, and established connections between different people and employees of the Russian special services. Here's how you comment on this verdict, the imputed charges against Mamad, in particular the alleged accusation that she published openly pro-Russian materials.
On the one hand, I want to draw attention to the fact that we are talking about an Azerbaijani citizen. On the other hand, I want to say that, for my part, clarifying the circumstances of the case through the competent authorities, that's it. If you have everything, go ahead. Lee News is with us. Ru.
Maria Vladimirovna, Portal. Ru. Pavel Muravyev, we are with you. We have one question for you today. You have already mentioned the situation that the British authorities expect to convince Biden, before the expiration of his term, to allow the use of long-range Western weapons against Russia. And at the same time, Jake Sullivan said that Biden would ask Trump not to stop helping Ukraine. At the same time, for example, the press secretary of the Trump headquarters himself stated that he wanted to organize peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, right literally on the first day of his new presidency. This is how, in your opinion, Moscow reacts and assesses such contradictory expectations from the upcoming Trump presidency.
That, it seems to me, is the key in your question, to evaluate the upcoming controversial. It is not necessary to evaluate the contradictory. There is no need to evaluate the contradictory upcoming. It is necessary to evaluate steps, concrete actions, committed deeds, or, well, if we are talking about intentions, then at least officially voiced in a certain hypostasis. That's when it can be evaluated. And when it's coming, but it's unclear what, plus it's also refuted right there, well, I think this is exactly the characteristic of the American political landscape. Let's leave it to their commentators. This is their country. This is their debate, and so on. We are a self-sufficient state that respects international law, which is ready and open to the development of mutually beneficial and mutually respectful relations based on international law with the whole world, and this has been demonstrated and supported by our actions. Well, it seems to me, throughout our history, we really know how to respond. We know how to fight back, defending our national interests again on the basis of international law. And we really are. There have been moments in our history when we trusted words, we believed promises, we have passed this lesson, and therefore now we proceed from concrete steps, concrete actions, and we will be guided by them and draw appropriate conclusions.
Okay, thanks. Can I clarify just a small clarification? After all, how do you feel about Trump's statements that literally on the very first day, he will directly start organizing negotiations?
Well, how? I've just devoted a whole monologue to this. As an intention, the President of the Russian Federation has already assessed these words, speaking at the Valdai Forum, that they deserve attention, and as actions, it is necessary that they happen. Then we will comment on them.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Is the Greater Asia TV channel with us? Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Yes, we have two questions today. The first one, how could you comment on the information that appeared in the media that in November of this year, the deadline expires, during which, according to the decree of November 22nd, 2023 of the year, persons admitted to Russian citizenship had to take the oath of a citizen of the Russian Federation. You know, indeed, on the 21st, I would say only not the 22nd, but on the 21st, a one-year period expires from the date of entry into force of the decree of the President of the Russian Federation mentioned by you, Decree number 889 of November 22nd of the 23rd year, during which those accepted into Russian citizenship in accordance with federal law from 2000 of the second year, they are obliged to take the oath of a citizen of the Russian Federation. What is it about? We are talking about the fact that the requirement to take the oath was introduced into Russian legislation from the 1st of September 2000 of the 17th year, will apply to all applicants who have reached the age of 18. Here I would like to clarify, because many people are asking now, you asked, the fact is that since that time, the decision on admission to Russian citizenship in itself is not a basis for recognizing a person as a citizen of the Russian Federation. Citizenship is acquired in accordance with the law from the moment a person takes the oath, and not from the date of the adoption of the relevant decision. I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that persons who were admitted to citizenship before the 1st of September 2017 year do not take the oath. Well, it is clear why. Because this decision was made in the 2017 year, they are considered to have acquired citizenship from the date of the decision by the competent authorities, but, again, everything needs to be carefully monitored for the date when the person issued, and he was accordingly issued citizenship. What kind of authorized body is this? These are the President of the Russian Federation, the bodies of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, diplomatic missions, consular institutions of the Russian Federation, and in this regard, we call on our compatriots who were admitted to citizenship abroad from September 1st, 2000 of the 17th year to November 22nd of the 23rd year, who did not take the oath, to immediately apply on this issue to the Russian foreign institution, in fact, to which the application for citizenship was submitted. And again, I would like to focus attention and emphasize that if such people, such compatriots, do not take the oath before the 21st of November of this year inclusive, they will be considered not to have acquired citizenship of the Russian Federation, and the decisions on their admission to citizenship will be invalid. I would like to note that this procedure also applies to children if the decision on their admission to citizenship was made after they reached the age of 18. Thank you very much. And the second question, what would you say about industrial development projects in Ukraine and how Russia treats these projects? The total cost of the projects of the Organization of the Nation for Industrial Development, we are talking about UNIDO. This structure is called, in Ukraine, is $36.7 million. The relevant projects are aimed at assisting the construction of industrial development, economic growth, strengthening of the agro-industrial complex, in accordance with the mandate of the organization. The main donors, these are the Global Economic Fund, Germany, Japan, Switzerland, Sweden, the European Union as a whole, Austria, Bulgaria. The network in Ukraine was created from 39 national experts to ensure coordination of work with this structure. We recognize the existence of development needs in Ukraine, and in this context, our country does not hinder the activities aimed at meeting them by the organizations of the undevelopment system, if the relevant projects are not politicized and are implemented in accordance with the mandate of the unstructures. Another thing is that, all the money that I mentioned, it's nothing compared to the hundreds of billions of dollars that are coming to Ukraine to destroy industry and the economy and the murder of Ukrainian citizens by the Kiev regime. Thank you. Is the messenger of the Caucasus with us?
Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
We have one question. How does Russia assess the holding of the COP29 in Baku and the significance of the initiatives put forward by Azerbaijan to combat climate change?
Well, we welcome, of course, the holding of the 29th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which took place in Baku from the 11th, which takes place in Baku from the 11th to the 22nd of November. And, of course, we highly appreciated the efforts of Azerbaijan as the chairman of the conference. And what is especially important, because for the first time in history, the largest unclimate event is being held in the CIS and the South Caucasus itself. But why is it important? Because these territories have their own unique specifics of the manifestation of climate processes, but at the same time, unfortunately, these territories, these regions, and these climate processes themselves, alas, are given more modest attention by the United Nations compared to other regions. Therefore, we traditionally support the holding of significant international events in the CIS countries. We know how to host these events, as you probably noticed, and our Azerbaijani colleagues have demonstrated this once again. As for the initiatives of the Azerbaijani chairmanship on the sidelines of the conference, Russia has joined most of them. We consider Baku's proposals both reasonable and timely.
Thank you very much.
Is the author AI publication with us? So, probably not with us. Then, is the voice of the fatherland with us?
Yes, hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
Here you are in the past. At one of the past briefings, you told about Elena Chesakova, who performed a feat by coming out with the flag of Russia. And after that, the national liberation movement intensified in Odessa and in other cities of Russia. Do you know anything about it? What goals do they pursue? And another question, how could Russia help free itself from the occupation of the United States of America? Ukraine.
About Ukraine. As you know, she is not the only one who is under Western, I don't know, occupation or colonial oppression. There are also countries that claim to be stable democracies, such as Germany, for example. There, for a second, 30,000 American soldiers. There are a number of countries on the European continent where, for example, American nuclear weapons are deployed, to which these countries have no access, and do not understand at all what is happening with them there. How many American bases around the world? And no one asks the population of these countries whether they want to be there or not. Therefore, I'm sorry, The American occupation is a phenomenon characteristic, unfortunately, for very many regions of our planet. Now about Elena Chesakova. We have indeed commented on this, and other representatives of Russian authorities and civil society, journalists have commented on it. As I understand it, she is currently under house arrest. In accordance with the current Ukrainian legislation, she faces a prison sentence. She could face up to 3 years in prison under the article justifying, as it is formulated, Russia's armed aggression against Ukraine, and in the current conditions, it is difficult to provide her with any other support. You understand perfectly well that there is no diplomatic and consular presence of Russia there, other than the one we are talking about, and implementing it informational, political on international platforms. And that's what we all do. We saw the information that passed in the media with reference to her mother, that her daughter's lawyer recommended that she publicly apologize and declare a change of political views. However, even under the threat of imprisonment, she did not renounce her beliefs. Well, once again, I do not know how events will develop further. I understand perfectly well what the Kiev regime and especially Western curators are doing to people. We have seen the example of Russian citizens, and we have read in their memoirs. Victor Buty, Maria Butina, and many others talked about how democracy is being created in the Western way. That's why there can be no other qualification here. This position is worthy of more than just respect. This, I think, is the most sincere and the most incredible manifestation of civic courage, not only in the interests of one country, one people, and this is certainly the case, because it was done, I am sure, in the interests of people who have lived in Ukraine for generations. But this is also being done within the framework of upholding the truth around the world. Historical truth, modern. I have already said that after all, when we conduct a special military operation and defend all these principles, we act not only in the interests of our own security or our own goal setting. We defend everything that the world and our civilization have historically crystallized as value orientations. We are well aware that millions of Ukrainians share the views of Elena Chesakova, and you are absolutely right. She found these powers in herself. Someone followed her, someone is in a state, maybe I do not know, of reflection, or I do not know, of finding support, in order to find similar forces for themselves. And in general, she reminded that Odessa is a hero city, and in order to get this title, people just like her performed a feat. They fought against the Nazis. They understood that they might not return. It wasn't about the comfort zone, and it wasn't about broken destinies. There was about life and about death. This city is one of the pearls not only of UNESCO attractions or monuments, not only of our history. This is a city where a lot of things are connected. This is the very multiculturalism that was the heritage of the Russian world, historically is now. This is a city that has become famous for the defenders who historically defended it, its population, for the sake of truth and truth. We understand that, as I said, she found the strength. People followed her. I think this is the realization that we must fight for the truth, for freedom, because of the true value. It's coming to a lot of people now, and we are now referring not only to geography, but to the planet in general. You see, 10 years ago, when we were talking about how all this gender nonsense is extremely dangerous, we saw grins, and, so to speak, a desire to somehow Stop talking about this topic. Now, a lot of people have woken up, and everyone understands that this trouble can come to every person's house, under the plausible pretext of tolerance, so to speak, not aggression and progress. We talked about Nazi manifestations in the world, in Europe, and in the United States of America, regularly issuing relevant reports too. Many did not believe it or tried to distance themselves from it. Now, this problem arises as extremism in various parts of the world. We talked about the fact that this unrestrained desire to interfere in the internal agenda, change regimes, abolish the legitimate government, leads to an increase in the terrorist threat, among other things. And on the example of the Arab Spring, and on the example of the situation in Ukraine, we were also not believed at the beginning. Now everyone has realized that their states, their peoples must be protected, because then it will be too late. Therefore, I think that her act motivated a lot of people.
Thank you, Maria Vladimirovna. Oh, one more question.
Yes, of course.
The biggest fate of the Kazan Declaration. As far as we know, it was sent to the UN. Or is it expected to be sent? Yes. But what do we expect from the United Nations, and how can it affect the world as a whole in general?
Well, I want to start with the UN. First of all, we have already distributed the declaration as a document of the United Nations. Secondly, the Secretary General himself took part in the BRICS Plus Out speech session in Kazan, where he noted the important role of unification, strengthening multilateralism to ensure global security development. Thirdly, but this is not in importance, but simply in the course of answering your question, this is a historical document. It reflects for the first time the common approaches of the states of the association after its expansion earlier this year, and thanks to the support of our partners, we managed to consolidate the main results of joint work under the Russian chairmanship in all major areas of this security policy. These are economics, finance, culture, humanitarian cooperation, and many other areas. The tasks for the near future are outlined. The relevant departments in charge of the relevant industry cooperation have already begun to work out concrete steps for their implementation, and we are passing this baton to our Brazilian friends, who will need to develop it all in the 25th year. Well, indeed, BRICS is a unique platform. It remains open to all those who share interests and principles. The unique nature of the format, which, in general, is deliberately deprived of such attributes of international organizations as the Charter and the Secretariat, creates opportunities for broad participation in its various mechanisms, manifestations, platforms through official departments, business circles, and civil society. And all this, of course, was reflected in the document of the Kazan Declaration you mentioned.
Yes, but people or organizations somehow, what is the principle, if citizens, for example, or organizations share the tasks set, and how can you join them or participate in this process?
Well, such a general question. There is a corresponding website that interests you specifically. You will choose the direction that you are interested in, find the appropriate sections of the heading. If you have a specific question that you have not found an answer to, please contact us. We will definitely answer you and indicate how this mechanism can realize your desire to participate. I just want to say, because it's all in the stage of really forming, this is not a structure that has worked for decades, perfected the mechanism of interaction. And there, I don't know. It expands once every 5 years by 1 or 2 members. This is a structure that was born and which declared itself relatively recently by historical standards and was suddenly expanded by, consider it, almost twice uniformly. And all this was crowned not with problems, but on the contrary with demonstrating the possibility of working even in such conditions. And this is despite the machinations that Westerners have been fixing all the time and continue to fix this association and its participants. So what does this mean? The fact that some formats have yet to be perfected including within the framework of civil society action. But I know a huge amount. And so we talked about BRICS television. Yes, please. The civil initiative, which was not launched from above, but which originated precisely as a civil society initiative, was approved, so to speak, by the BRICS, and has been developing for several years, as we talked about at the last briefing. So submit your specific question. I think we will definitely help you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just in case, I'll ask if he's still with us. With us is the publication author AI. If not, then we will respond individually. Thank you very much.